Go back to when you, or maybe before then, who was your first friend? You remember it? May remember somebody who was in class with you, or somebody who lived next door to you, maybe somebody that you had a connection with, right? For some of you, that first friend may still be there. I think Boo and Ann Russell's been friends for 70 years, I believe. For some of you, you may be struggling to remember who that person even was because you moved or they moved or you finished school or went somewhere different and you just don't remember them at all. And some of you may not have thought about that person in 20 or 40 or 60 years, but you're thinking about them right now. And you might be thinking about enjoyable experiences you had with them. I was thinking about this a few weeks ago. I'd seen something on TV, and it's odd how things prompt you to think about other things. But I was thinking about people that are really famous. Think about like pro ball players, politicians. And I was thinking, do they really have friends? Well, for a lot of them, it might be that those people that you just thought about, that you live next door to or you grew up with, are friends of theirs. But it would be really hard if you were a professional basketball player for the New York Knicks to be in friendships with people. It would be really hard if you were the star of the biggest movie in Hollywood to be friends with people. I think it would be really hard to be the president and be friends with people. And the reason why is the same for all three. Everybody that you come in contact with, you'd have to wonder, what do they want from me? What do they want from me? Are they truly trying to be friends with me? You know, when you think about it like that, perhaps that's a sad sight to see somebody who would appear to have everything, but maybe not truly have any friends. The things that the world says matters the most, what are they? Money, right? Money would matter the most. Maybe influence on people would matter the most. Power would matter the most. Those three things fit pretty good for these careers that we just talked about where people maybe are high ranking. But those people would struggle to have friends. They might be alone. And the Bible actually talks a bit about this, and we're going to talk about it tonight in here. Bible tells us, or teaches us, seems to teach us that God doesn't intend for us to be alone. In fact, you could go all the way back to the very start of your Bible, Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18, and it says, the Lord God said, do you remember what it said? It is not good for man to be alone. And I think we would agree with that even to this very day, right? That person that you're friends with, Boo, that you've been friends with for 70 years, you would probably agree with that. But even somebody who just moved in next door to you, or even somebody who just got hired at your place of work that you have befriended, you would agree with that as well. Those friendships are important. But even still, loneliness plagues people today. We talk a lot about this at school. We look for kids that are struggling with this. We try to help them. I was telling Mom the other night about a story, a girl that I work with. There were two girls sitting in the cafeteria, and she said, her plan was, I'm going to get them two to be friends with each other. And she went over to talk to them, to try and talk to them and try to merge them together. And she said she sat there for a couple minutes, said a couple things, and realized, I don't think they want to be friends with each other. It didn't work, right? Some people choose loneliness. You may know people that have chosen to not be friends with anybody. I think that's sad, but sometimes that's the case. And some people's personalities maybe direct them that way. But sometimes, even in ourselves, things like pride, selfishness, and sin keep us from being friends with others as well. So we're going to talk tonight about the kind of friendships that we should have. And I hope that this is not something for you that's going to make you think that you don't have friends, but I hope it's something that we can examine the friendships that we do have. Let's talk just a second about the emptiness of a friendless life. I want to give you a scenario to think about right now. I want you to think about a house that is filled with noise, filled with laughter, filled with people. Think about that house for just a second. I want you to think about the person that owns the house, and they are sitting in silence in the back room, cut off from everybody. Now, outwardly, how does this look? Outwardly, you look and you see 100 people living it up in the house. This man, this woman, must have tons of friends. But inwardly, would seem to be alone, right? There's people there, but he's not enjoying the experience. Can we have a crowd and still be alone? We absolutely can. We talk about this a lot with students, and it's different today. And I would say this because every generation has said this, but it's certainly different today growing up than it was when you were growing up or when I was growing up. We joked the other day at school about there's a girl that I work with who's quite a bit younger, and I tell her, it's like, well, you could call people, but you had to wait until after 7 o'clock. It was long distance. And like literally every part of that sentence, just she couldn't grasp any of that. And today, you have the whole world at your fingertips. We give our children the whole world at their fingertips when they're 6th grade, right? You were in 6th grade. If you didn't have a ride home from school, you just found a way home, right? That's where all the walk 5 miles to school stories came from, right? I worry for our kids. They're not going to be able to tell that story. Life was so tough. I didn't have service and couldn't get a ride home. That's not the way it works. But we talk to our kids about friendships that they make, and because they're more interconnected, their friendship developing is different. I talked about one day at school, I said, after 8th grade, I said goodbye to my girlfriend, and we got to see each other twice the whole summer. We got back to school, must not have been great. She broke up with me, but right then we said goodbye. But today we have all of these connections. But we have to remember that applause is not friendship. We have to remember that followers are not necessarily friends. If your friends flatter you rather than speak the truth, you're still alone. You ever known people that do that? There's somebody that sort of runs the place and all their friends, oh, your shirt is so pretty. Oh, your hair is so pretty. Oh, you got this or you got that. I love that. Is that a friend? Maybe not. Proverbs chapter 27 and verse 6, it reminds us, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Think about that for a second. The kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Oh, you are the best, right? Go around the corner and say all the bad things about them that you possibly could. That ever happen in friendships? You're thinking, oh, I saw that happen in that movie about those kids that were teenagers. No, that stuff still happens today, right? That happens with adults even today. We can't mistake popularity for friendship. I'm sure a lot of those people that we talked about, the ball players, the actors, the politicians, whoever it is, there's probably a lot of popularity in those friendships, and that can be really tough. And so what I got to ask ourselves is, am I nurturing relationships that are real? Or are they only on the surface connections? You've probably got some real relationships in your life. You've probably got some surface connections in your life as well, right? What's the difference? Well, the surface connection is somebody that you can maybe ask something from. It might be somebody that you have something in common with, and it might be that you work next door or whatever it might be. But those real relationships, you can ask a whole lot more from. I would imagine that Ann Russell, Boo's best friend, There are things that Boo would ask her that the rest of us probably wouldn't. Because she's a friend and we know her maybe, but she's Boo's best friend. And the same with you, whoever it is. But that didn't just happen overnight. We build that over time. The person that we're with, they'll cheer you when you succeed. But the question is, will they sit with me when I suffer? That's the difference, right? Who's going to be sitting there with you when the bad times come? Because there's a whole lot of people that I'm sure would love to get close to LeBron James. But whenever his mother passed away, they're probably not going to be there for him, right? The same thing with us. We're not famous or popular or anything else, but we have to develop real relationships with that. Let's go a little further. Let's talk about the danger that can come from both pride and isolation. I want you to imagine a captain of a ship, and the captain refuses to listen to the crew. So here's the situation. They're sailing along, and the sailors see rocks ahead, but the captain insists that he knows best. I know best. And what we see then shortly is this loud crunching sound, and the ship has hit rock. The ship crashes. Not because the rocks were hidden. No, we just said that the rocks had been pointed out. But they crashed because pride refused to hear the warning. Do you know anybody in life who that would probably happen to? You ever come across somebody that you could tell them that there were rocks ahead and they'd say, nope, I will make it through this, right? Sometimes we're like that, right? We're going straight forward at the rocks, ready to crash the boat, and we're not willing to listen to anybody along the way. That's pride, right? Proverbs 16 and verse 18 teaches us what? It says, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. We see that in the Bible, right? Pride will be the downfall. How many people in the history of the world has pride been the downfall of? So many, right? You could flip through your Bible tonight and you say, I'm going to take 20 minutes and find people in the Bible that pride was that led to the downfall of them. Can you think of any? Probably could come up with a list pretty quick of people where that happens. 2 chapters over, Proverbs chapter 18, we read at the start, it says, a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire, and he rages against all wise judgment. Think about that for a second. A man who isolates himself. We tend to think about isolating ourselves as I'm going to go over here and hide and there's nobody going to be around me. But that's not what this means right here. A person that essentially says what I know is up here and what you know is down here. When I isolate myself, I'm seeking what I want. And thank you, Ben, but I have no interest in you telling me what would be best. When a person isolates himself, they rage against all wise judgment. It's the old saying, there's never time to do it right, and there's always time to do it over, right? Sometimes we think about things, we grow up, we get a little older, and we say, well, Mom knew what she was talking about when she said that, right? But we struggle with that at the time. If we only surround ourselves with voices that agree, you're going to drive away the ones that care for your soul. And I dare say that it seems like more so now than ever, although it's probably not true, we can isolate ourselves in this way. That we only want to hear from those who agree with us. It's easy to, right? It's easy to. We have so many means of communication. We talked about that earlier, right? There are 1 billion TV channels on your television. And there are 1 billion TV and places to get information on your computer and on your phone, right? 50 years ago, news came on at 6. That's all it was, right? If you missed it, I hope nothing bad happened. We'll see it tomorrow, right? That's kind of the way it worked. But we can isolate ourselves by just surrounding ourselves with people who only tell us what we want to hear. We do the same thing in our life with our friends. Boo is sometimes mean to me, so I'm not going to talk to her, but Maria never says anything that I dislike, so now she's my best friend. We sometimes do that. These things seem childish, but adults do this all the time. First verse in the book of Psalms, Psalms 1:1. It says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful." It says, blessed is the person who does just that. Don't push away people when they tell you something that you don't want to hear. You remember the story about David, and we talk about this, right? We've talked about this before, but David is a good example of pride. He's a good example of a friend coming to him. And I've heard this taught. I'm 44 years old. I've heard it taught for 44 years that when David's friend Nathan comes to him and explains the story, kind of speaks in a bit of a parable to him about the man who had the other man killed, and David gets fired up, right? He says, "Who is this man? We're gonna get rid of him." He said, "You are the man," right? Nathan said that to him. What if there hadn't been a Nathan? David needed to hear that. David needed to be told, you are in the wrong. We can still be friends before, and we can still be friends afterwards, but we needed to be told right then, you are in the wrong. Do we sometimes need a Nathan in our life? And sometimes we may need to be the Nathan to somebody else in their life as well. A true friend doesn't just love on you, doesn't just comfort you, but they'll also correct you, because we need that just as much. There's a man named Johnson Oatman, lived from 1856 to 1922. Y'all know him? If you've sang many songs in the hymn book, his name's on the bottom of a few of them. He wrote a handful of songs. Spent most of his life as a Methodist preacher, and he was also an insurance salesman, Mount Holly, New Jersey. Mount Holly, New Jersey is actually an eastern suburb of Philadelphia. I found it interesting. When I was reading about him, there was a boy that was in my English 101 class at UK that was from Mount Holly, New Jersey. He sat right beside me. He was maybe the only person I ever knew from New Jersey. But nonetheless, Johnson Oatman lived there. And he served as both a minister and as an insurance salesman. And I'd say maybe he used both of these vocations as a source, but there's a song in your hymn book called No, Not One. Might be called There's Not a Friend as well. And if you look at it, the first verse talks about Jesus as being a friend and a healer of the soul. And in the second verse, it points to how that Jesus is both holy and meek. Two seemingly different things, right? In the final verse, at least in our book, I think there's 5 or 6 verses in the full psalm, but 3 in the one that you'll know. The final verse speaks to both his nearness and his presence in darkness. And those are important characteristics for a friend. A friend who can also help you heal. A friend who's both holy, higher up than anything, but also meek. Not going to tell you all about it. A friend who's there nearby when you need them, and especially when times are difficult. Jesus is a friend that you need. Human friendships are fragile, right? Think back to when I asked you a moment ago about the first friend that you ever had. For some of you, that friend may not be a friend anymore because of something that happened along the way. Y'all may have fell out for whatever reason, right? May not even know why, but maybe you did. People disappoint us, right? And we kind of run this street both ways. We disappoint people as well. People betray us. And we betray friendships as well. People abandon us. And we sometimes abandon others as well. But there's one friend who doesn't let go. Tom read there just a second ago, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. Paul's on trial. Paul's recounting, it's not really on trial, he's recounting it in this letter to Timothy. He's on trial in Acts. But Paul is on trial here, and he said, at my first offense, notice this, he said, at my first offense, no one stood with me. Let's dial that back for just a second. You remember Paul, right? You remember Paul? You probably remember Paul because he originally was called Saul, right? Alan talked a little bit about that this week, but Saul stood there when Stephen was killed, right? Saul was asking, begging, can I go to Damascus? There ain't enough people to persecute here. Can I go to Damascus and persecute a few more? When Saul was on trial, I dare say that there were some people who probably thought, probably good for him, right? Kind of a rough and rowdy character. Probably deserved it. People are like that, right? People will abandon. People will betray. Paul said, at my first offense, no one stood with me. But skip over just a little bit. He said, but the Lord stood with me and strengthened me. He would later say he could do all things through Christ, right? I think he's when he wrote that, I'm sure he was probably thinking about how that God had been there with him, right? How that he had been strengthened by that. We need that type of friend. But you're not going to get it from the people in here. And we're all good people and you're all wonderful. And I'm glad to have all of you as friends, but you can't be as good a friend as Jesus can be. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 5, it says, let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. For he himself has said, I will never leave nor forsake you. That's comforting, right? You've probably said that to your spouse or to your kids, maybe to your friend. You said, I'll be there with you the whole time. But sometimes we fail in that. Jesus said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. In fact, we can go back to the very end of the book of Matthew. Matthew chapter 28 and verse 20, we read, it says, lo, I am with you always. He's talking to the apostles. And he's sending the apostles out into the world. And essentially what he's sending them on is a death mission because they're going to go out and preach the gospel. But the odds are very good that they're not going to come back. And he says in chapter 28 and verse 20 of Matthew, he says, lo, I'm with you always. Till when? It says, till the end of the age. We talked about those apostles on Sunday night back a while back. And some of them we know a whole lot about, and some of them we know very little about. A lot of it's tradition that we know, but it seemed like every one of them had a negative end, right? And some of them put to death. Some of them were killed for preaching and teaching on some place that I'd say when they looked around, they didn't see anybody that they really knew. Probably people speaking a language different from the one that they'd grown up with. But I wonder how many of them were comforted by Matthew chapter 28 and verse 20, right when it ended. That I am with you always. That same thing is written down for me and you today. Heard people say that if you live long enough, everybody will let you down. Jesus won't. And one not letting you down is better than 100 that might, right? Earthly friends fail. Jesus remains. Family turns away. Jesus draws near. The crowd, the wealth, the fame, the influence, the power, when all that's gone, Jesus still be by your side. That's comforting, right? May lose every friend you ever have. But if you'll walk with Jesus, you'll never lose him. Friend who lived with you, lived for you, died for you. And here's the comforting part. When this life is over, he's the friend that'll welcome you home. And that should be comforting for everyone. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. If there's anything we can do for you, anything at all, we invite you to come while we stand and sing.
There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. No, yes, to heal our